Just wanted to put out a disclaimer out there. This is by no means an analysis or any attempt at having this be the ultimate guide and explanation of Serial Experiments Lain. It's just my overall thoughts and impressions of my first ever watch, as well as diving into some of what the other parts of the community made out of Serial Experiments Lain. So definitely enjoy that. Oh, by the way, this episode has a lot of spoilers, so continue at your own risk.
Okay, let's see. I guess that I'm confused again. Am I here or am I there? I don't know. Over there, I'm everywhere. I know that. But here is connected to over there. Is that right? But then where is the real me after all is said and done? Oh, there is no real me. I guess that's it. I only exist inside those people aware of my existence. But what about this me that I can hear talking right here and now? It's me, isn't it? This me that's talking. Who is it? Who's me?
All right. So, welcome to the fourth episode of A Dose of Animation. This is going to be actually quite a big one because not only do I have a lot written for this episode, this is going to be the first episode that I actually put on YouTube. It's going to be part of a plan to broaden my platform. I have SoundCloud on here and then I have Anchor as well. But I'm going to keep on expanding to different platforms and making myself as available as possible. So this will be the first YouTube episode. And I'm thinking of doing Spotify in the future. So once I have stuff like that ready, the Spotify and even an RSS feed, which I should probably be setting up definitely, I'll keep everybody posted on that. Until then, we're going to get into this damn series. Serial Experiments Lain. This series is no damn joke. One of the first things I heard about this series, especially in high school is when I first heard about it. And one of the first things that I heard about was how this anime that came out in 1998 was kind of, I don't want to say predicting, but for lack of a better word, it kind of predicted how society would be now with internet. It just, in the anime, you see a lot of different ways that people are connected. You see people with their Navi computers. Those are the PCs of Lane's world. And then you have people walking on the streets on the phone, texting with the touchscreens. Like, that's one of the first things that jumped out at me when I was hearing about it. I didn't watch it, but that was one of the things that I heard. Another thing that I did hear was about how it kind of predicted Anonymous, sort of. Like, that one I didn't understand. It was like that. They're called the Knights, and I'll get into that later because I don't really agree. But that was another thing. So with the way that people were talking about this show and how it sort of told the future somewhat, that is what got me interested to watch it recently. So I spent 2 days watching it. I watched, pretty much the whole thing in like 2 days. And there's a lot of good stuff that I really love about this. One of the things that I expected out of Lain was a trip, because that's another thing I heard. It was like very trippy, psychedelic atmosphere, and they're right. I was definitely weirded out and horrified. But there were kind of different feelings that I wasn't really expecting either. I got kind of drained out in some parts, because some of the atmosphere in the show kind of feels like that. One of the things that lends itself to that kind of atmosphere is the electrical generator humming that you hear throughout the show, and it's very, very prominent in the show. Like, you hear it, I think it's every episode. Yeah, it pretty much is every episode that you hear it, and that kind of ties into the wired kind of connection, or the frequency that they talk about in the show, Schumann resonance, the frequency of the earth, and that electrical humming sound is kind of like a representation of that in some kind of ways. But there's a lot more that I'm going to be talking about in this podcast episode anyways. That's just some of the things. So, yeah. Through my first watch of this anime, it wasn't as convoluted as I thought it was going to be, honestly, because I going in, like I said before, based off what some of the people said about it being so confusing and stuff, I strangely found some kind of cohesiveness to it though. Like it was convoluted, but every single thing you see had like a reason. And one of these examples is I saw what the girls meant when they said that they saw a different Lain at Siberia. Not at first, but then when you progress through the series and you see Lain acting in a way that is very strange, almost when I first saw her started acting strange, I assumed it was something like a split personality disorder type of thing, or dissociative identity disorder type of deal. And it seems to be the case. And actually, that pretty much is the case. So you have one claim being made around the second episode, and then over time you see that claim being true. And so that's really what I meant. And it's kind of crazy because when I was watching this show, I didn't try to put much effort into understanding everything. I just tried to take it all in. That's kind of what I do with these kinds of shows that are very obscure, very detail oriented and very ambiguous. I do that a lot with those kind of shows. I try not to put too much effort into understanding every single scene, because then I lose sight of the stuff that's right there in front of me. I start to lose sight because I start digging into my mind and creating all these assumptions and things when really I just want to take it all in. And that's definitely what I did with Lain, and it helped a lot because, as I explained, it helped me see a little bit of cohesiveness within the show itself. I can also see why people were saying that the show was weird. There's a lot of really good directing techniques in here, and that's courtesy of Ryutaro Nakamura. Rest in peace to him. One of the things that he implemented into the show, which lasted until the very end, was the galaxy-like imagery in the shadows, which I feel makes things very otherworldly in a way. And I kind of feel like Lain is also sort of like that. Very, I want to say, out of touch, I guess, because she isn't exactly human. So, I mean, to them, especially the stuff that she does, very otherworldly type of things. You know, obviously, a human doesn't just erase the memories of people and stuff like that. So, I don't know if that was kind of meant to intertwine, like the direction of that, but that's kind of the thing that I found in my viewing of the anime throughout the whole 13 episodes. Also, just going back to what I had explained was the electrical generator humming. That's another thing, because in this, I touched on it a little bit, but one of the things that's in the show is this thing called the Schumann resonance, and it's the frequency at which the earth hums. And that's why I was saying that that's essentially what the electrical humming represents in the show. So with that quickly being said, I do want to touch upon one of the few things that I didn't really agree with, and I guess I don't really agree with now, still to this day, is the fact that Serial Experiments Lain kind of, for lack of a better word, predicted the Anonymous Collective. So when people say this, they're referring to the Knights, also known as the Knights of the Eastern Calculus. And I didn't really get that impression at all. Like, it didn't even cross my mind. It crossed my mind, but the only reason why it did is because I had heard about it previously, but I kind of just forgot about it as I kept on watching the show, because these guys, the Knights were more of like a cult, in my opinion. To me, they seemed like a cult. And when I say that, it's because they focused on honoring the wishes of a centralized deity, which would be Masami 80, towards a centralized goal, which was to restart reality and reform it in his own way. They didn't really realize that either, though. But, you know, I guess cult members normally don't realize what they're worshipping anyways. And so the way I was thinking about it is that the only reason I feel like they could be similar is the fact that the members were buried in anonymity, and they were a collective mindset, sort of a digitized global brain. God dang it. It's a fucking phone going off. Gotta put on vibrate. So yeah, but in my opinion, that's as far as the comparisons go, right? Because Anonymous, from as I understand it, Anonymous's main aim is to right the wrongs via the internet. You know, this has resulted in cyber attacks and politically charged ones at that, such as the attack of the Church of Scientology in 2008, which was their first ever one. And so, yeah, like I said, the Knights to me are more like a cult group focused on just honoring a higher power of some sorts or a centralized deity, you know, and they're just a digitized brain, but that's as far as the comparisons I see go. It's a very limited comparison. I guess if you think about it, the Knights did they launched attacks towards Lain and all that. But the manner at which they went, I think, is just a little bit different, you know, because the Anonymous doesn't worship one leader or one higher power. They don't really do that. That's not how they roll. But in Knights, they did launch attacks, outward attacks to move a goal, you know, but they have more of like a cult attitude amongst them in the way that they think, you know. And I don't think that's the way Anonymous roll. And the Knights clearly roll a different way in the ways that I described, trying to throw off Lain and really just break her down. It's focused on one person, one aspect. Right. So going from that, because besides that, I really don't have much to say on that kind of topic. That's really my main points of my main disagreement, really. But we're going to go from there. We're going to move on to... Let me look over here. We're going to go towards interpretations now of scenes. And there's one scene in particular, which was towards the end of the anime, when Lain had erased everybody's memories of her. She ends up seeing her friends for the last time in what is not reality. I believe it to be a negative space of some sorts. And in the moment when she goes to talk to her friends, another Lain jumps out of her. That would be the anti-Lain. And she greets her friends, being very, very evil as usual. She erased the memories of everyone, like the memories that everyone had of her, so that no one remembers the Lain that previously existed. She now just exists in the wired only. I see people interpret this scene in different ways. One way is that Lain the splitting scene, reflects the way that we are divided by our existence in the real world to the existence we have in the digitized world, which would be like social media and such. That might be a little bit of an unpopular one because there's a couple more that I've seen that are a little bit more higher than that, but I kind of like that one. It's kind of one way to interpret it. Like I said, serial experience Lain is very ambiguous, so I could see how someone would kind of go to that kind of conclusion, you know, especially given the heavy themes of internet and all that in the show. You know, I can see why someone would go to that. But there's another way I've seen someone describe the scene, which would be that it's the manifestation of Lain's dissociative identity disorder, otherwise known as DID. About partway of the series, it is seen that Lain starts to lose herself slowly and starts to not be able to tell what's real and what's not. Whether she is real or not is something she starts to ask herself a lot, and it really eats away at her. And this is kind of where the postmodernistic aspect of the show, well, it isn't where it comes in because the whole show is just drenched in that kind of philosophy. But this is where you really start to see it, when she doesn't even know what's really real anymore. She breaks down and she starts switching her personalities, especially when she's confronted at Tachibana Labs. Like, you really see her just go all sporadic with the way she acts and stuff. She starts hyperventilating. She starts getting these crazy just splitting personalities and such, and starts talking differently. You know, she doesn't know what's real, and that, I think, in itself is very postmodernistic in the way that she questions the reality of everything around her. It isn't really just her, but everything around her and associated with her. I think that's one of the reasons why people come to so many conclusions on what this kind of series could mean. And that's also one of the reasons why I've kind of been a little bit on the hunt for older reviews of this show. That's something that I've always taken kind of an interest to, is I want to see what people of that time of when this show came out, I wanted to see what they kind of thought and how they interpreted Lain, because people now we're kind of living in that world that Lain kind of, had interpreted, with being so connected to one another. But the world wasn't necessarily like that when Lain came out. We weren't so interconnected with each other in every aspect of our life. That's why I was actually talking to somebody about this on I don't know if it was YouTube or something else, but they were saying that it's more better to look at older reviews of when Lain came out, like maybe 1999, maybe like the early 2000s too, because at that time it'd be a lot more easier to kind of get a better understanding of what people thought about Lain at the time and their interpretations, because we hadn't reached that time yet that Lain was kind of interpreting. And so in my search for those kinds of reviews, I haven't found anything. It's really hard. The closest that I've got is this very interesting website. It's called Thoughts Experiment Lain. And this website was first created in 1999, which is exactly in the ballpark of the kind of things I'm looking for relating to this show. I want to see what people's minds were like and how they interpreted the ideas that Lain was presenting at the time that it came out. And so the thing about this website though is that it's not really a review of sorts, but I still want to talk about it because it does go over the ideologies and philosophy that are presented in Lain. And so that brings me to one of the useful links that I found on this website. It was a panel discussion that was held by Yasuyuki Ueda, who is the original creator of the series, and Yoshitoshi Abe, who is the original character designer for the show. It was held in the year 2000 in Baltimore, Maryland for Otakon, which was a popular convention that I believe is still running, that it still happens every now and then. But this panel has a lot of interesting questions that kind of lead to really interesting interpretations of the show by the creators themselves. So I would like to get into one of them that I saw when I was reading the transcript. So one of them says, it's a question, so I'll be quoting this. So the question was, do you find it best that the viewer leave Lain and interpret it for themselves instead of coming out and explaining everything? And so this is where the Yasuyuki Ueda, he talks about that it's up for interpretation to anybody. A lot of different types of interpretations you can have. He says, and I quote, "Yeah, because when we made this, we had certain goals and certain things we wanted to express. But everyone has their own opinion, their own reality that they possess. And so just because I think a certain way or I want this certain thing to be understood, that doesn't mean that I don't think you should get something else out of it. That I disagree with this, there's no kind of life like this. As long as you enjoy it, you get something out of it yourself." End quote. And I think it's because of this that there's just so much interpretations of what Lain is. That's kind of why I don't like the fact that some people out there try to create this kind of, how do I say, it's like they'll make a video or post and they'll be like, oh, this will be the ultimate guide of Lain, but that just goes against really what the creator was saying. Like there's so many interpretations of Lain, you can't really have an ultimate guide because that doesn't really make sense, especially when the show's so ambiguous, as I've stated already a whole bunch of times. You can't really have an ultimate overall guide of Lain and this is what it is and your interpretation is not valid or whatever, like in my opinion that just goes against what it means to live in a postmodernistic society, not seeing things for exactly what they are, but kind of coming up with what you kind of believe in. And so when Yasuyuki Ueda had explained all of that and said all of that, it reminded me to back when I first watched Lain on the first, I believe it was the first or second episode, when she's in class and she's sitting down and she she kind of takes a moment to just look around. She has smoke coming out of her fingers. She looks at the board and she can't make any sense of what's on the board. The words are just all bungled up and whatnot. And at the time, I did have my own interpretation of the scene. What I was personally thinking of when I saw that scene is that it has something to do with Lain's sort of disorder. I kind of thought it was something along the lines of depersonalization disorder. I thought that she was going through an episode of that, because for those who don't know, depersonalization is, it can consist of a detachment within the self regarding one's mind and body, or being a detached observer of oneself. So, it feels like, the world is like less real or just dreamlike and something like that. So that's what I thought. I thought she was just going through an episode of that because it seemed that way. It seemed like she was losing kind of grip of reality and she just couldn't make sense of anything that was around her. But then I was, I don't remember if it was a video or a blog post or a comment, but I did. And I think this makes a lot more sense. It's crazy just thinking about it, but one person described that scene as Lain starting to reinforce herself into reality because she has no recollection of herself from the Wired, or that at least she tries to forget about it. So when she wanted to create a life for herself, a normal human life, this is when it first started. And all those signs of the fog coming out of her fingertips, the smoke, and looking at the board and not being able to recognize the letters, this was kind of her assimilating into the human existence. That was her way of assimilating into it. And so that's why she started going through these weird kind of phases, because it was her new body, her new mind, her new human body. So she was just trying to get used to everything. And I think that actually makes a lot more sense than what I thought. But I didn't completely take away from what my initial thought was, because it could also be looked at it like that way. That's kind of the beauty of Serial Experiments Lain. It's so open to a lot of different interpretations. If I had stayed with the depersonalization disorder type of thing, or an episode of that, it wouldn't really be entirely wrong. Neither is the other person what they said, which was her assimilating into the human reality. That's also something that can be correct too. It's open to interpretation, and I kind of like think of it in both ways personally, because a lot of people say that Lain also kind of has this feel of her having a disorder, like especially with the split personality episodes and the later episodes of Lain. And I've even seen people use that aspect of Lain to sort of relate to her as well. People with disabilities, they kind of relate to her in that aspect. It's like Lain is so relatable from many different ways. You have the computer people who are really into PCs, and Lain was way into PCs, building them and stuff. And then you kind of have the disability sort of aspects of Lain and how those people can relate to her. So it's like literally there's so many different ways that you can come at this show and relate to it. And that's also one of the reasons why I think Serial Experiments Lain is really unique, and also one of the reasons why I think you should watch it, because it'll just encourage more interpretations of the show. And I would love to hear other people's interpretations even more as I kind of dive into the forums and discussions and whatnot. I would love to see more and maybe change my perception a little bit of the show. So definitely I encourage anybody that's listening right now to really take a look at this show and really just run wild with the imagination and what you can come up with. To those who've made it this far, thank you so much for listening.